Hi everyone. So today I'm going to show you an advanced tutorial for product photography, and this type of image requires quite a bit of work cleaning up. We've got some issues with the tripod in the image. We've got different the exposure isn't evenly placed across the image. We've got some like hot spots from some windows that we were working with. And ultimately, the client did not want the shadow as long for the box, which, because this was like a really big box, the approach I took was just to deal with it in post. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how to get to a nice, clean, final image. So this is an advanced tutorial. I'm going to try and be as quick as I can, but also as thorough as I can. But it does require some familiarity with Photoshop, because I will be bringing this into Photoshop ultimately. But what I did was I started with the image in Lightroom and I made some initial edits here. So what I did is I increased the exposure, and I'll show you the before and after here. All right, so actually, because this is a virtual copy, I'm not going to be able to show you that. But what I ended up doing was increasing the exposure a little bit. Sorry, my computer is being a little slow today. All right, so increasing the exposure, increasing the contrast, bringing down the highlights, bringing up the shadows, down the whites, up the blacks. So if I were to settings, actually, let me see if I can do this. So I can create virtual copy, settings, reset all settings, and then I'm going to do this. So there, that is what the before after is for this. I did reduce the clarity a little bit to give it a tad bit of a soft look. And then I left everything the same. I did click these two buttons, which I always do. And then as far as transformation, nothing. I didn't change anything else down here. So ultimately I made some very basic edits here to start with. So what I'm going to do from here is, and then I did do some dodging and burning. So with the highlights, I did, reduce some of the highlights in this area. Again, highlights in this area, highlights on the diaper, I brought those down. So what was happening is there were some really big hot spots with the highlights. So I went and dodged and burned those. So after I do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Edit, Edit In, and I'm going to do Edit in Photoshop. And it's just going to open here. Let's give it a second. So with this image, I used two lights. I had one light that was bare bulb that was creating the hard shadows with my speed light, and the other was creating a little bit of fill to make it a little bit more evenly lit, and that was in a soft box. If you guys are interested, I can tell you a little bit more about the setup, but I'm going to go ahead and jump right into Photoshop. So the first thing I do with Photoshop is I always duplicate the background. So I'm going to go ahead and drag that to this little guy here, duplicate the background, because if I screw up, I'm going to have a layer to go back to. And I always just try and take an approach like one step at a time. And so the first thing I generally like to do is clean up the background. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to work on getting rid of these tripod feet. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my marquee tool and create just a rectangle around that. And then I'm going to go to Edit, Fill, and then I'm going to go to Content Aware. And this sometimes works, sometimes doesn't, but what it's going to do is going to look around the image for clues on what this should be. So it's content aware. So it's looking to be aware of the content around it and see what it can do. And it actually did a pretty good job of doing that. This little guy over here, let's see if I just drew a little box around, and the shortcut for this is Shift F5. content aware. Let's see how well it does. It does pretty good. So I'm going to deselect by Command D, and I'm going to go ahead and look at our image here, and I'm going to see what we want to do. So ultimately I want to, so my approach is I want to make sure that the background is much more even in terms of color and exposure and tone. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and make a selection of the background, and there's a couple ways you can do this. And so you can try to use this like magic wand thing, and sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't, but it looks like it's really not doing a great job. So what I'm going to try and do is go to select color range, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to select this blue here and see how well that does. And it's looking like it's doing okay. Let's see what it comes up with. And to be honest, like, I know there's people out there that are really good at this, and you know, this is just the way I do it, and it probably isn't the most efficient, but it seems to work. So what I'm going to work on now is work on selecting as much as I can of the area that I need. So I've got my selection tool here, and I'm just using the quick selection. So I'm going to bring this out here because I do want to include that type of blue, and I'm going to go here. And then ultimately, like, I don't want this selected, so I'm going to hold down Option and deselect that. So when it's a plus, when your circle has a plus, you're selecting, and when it has a minus, if you hold down Option, it's deselecting. So I'm going to deselect this shadow, and then I'm going to deselect, I'm going to bring down my brush size a little bit, deselect this Pampers box. I'm going to deselect this. Sorry, my dog is barking. I think my husband just got home. Let me shut my door. Okay, so now I'm going to just continue with this, deselecting the items that I don't want selected. And because ultimately what I want to do is I want to select the blue, because I'm going to be using a technique to really, I'm actually going to be coloring on the blue and to try and even out the color here. So I'm going to deselect this. And if it's not perfect, that's okay. I usually go in and clean up manually as well. So if you end up like not getting every single thing deselected, that's okay. So I don't want to include these. These didn't get deselected, so I'm going to do that. Deselect this. Deselect these wipes here. These little baby bibs. Now I'm trying to be like as thorough as I can with this tutorial, but obviously if these were your own images, like, you may want to just really take your own time with that. You know, this just is to give you an idea of some of the techniques you can use to edit some of these images that may be a little bit more challenging to edit. Okay, so now that I have that done, I'm going to go to my brush, and if I hold down Option, it's going to give me this like little eyedropper tool, and I'm going to sort of pick like a color blue that I want to paint on. And I'm going to drop the opacity, and I'm going to bring down the hardness a little bit, make the brush a little softer. And I'm actually going to make the brush bigger. And I'm just going to sort of brush on here, like where I think that like the color needs to be like evened out, and see how automatically that is like making such a huge difference. All right, so I'm going to zoom in here, see how we're looking. That looks really good. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and deselect. And there was this little spot here that for whatever reason wasn't selected. So I'm going to like paint over that. Just bring up my opacity here, paint over that. And then there were a couple spots here from that window that I'm going to go ahead and use my clone tool. You can kind of see right around here and here. All right, so I'm going to go back to my brush tool. And I'm just going to brush along here. And actually, before I do that, I'm going to go backwards just a little bit. I am going to reselect this area and the box. And I'm going to invert that selection because I actually don't want to actually paint inside of here. I want to paint outside of there. So I'm going to go to select, inverse. And so I'm going to paint on the outside. And I'm going to lower my brush size so that I'm not getting anything over here as well. And then I want to paint over here to even out this blue a little bit more. Okay. So immediately, that's looking so much better, right? Okay. So the next thing that's kind of bugging me is this box. It was kind of like tilted. So I'm going to fix that by selecting the box or selecting the area that I want to work on. So I want to work on this area. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my clone tool. I'm going to make it a little bit smaller. And if you hold down Option, you're going to pick the area that you want to use as your base. And you're just going to clone. And I'm just going to drag it right along here, just like that. Actually, before I deselect, I want to fix this little blip over here. It's kind of annoying me. So that's one way you can fix that. The next thing I want to work on is this shadow here. So the client wanted the shadow not to be so deep. So one way I think I'm going to approach that is just again with the clone tool. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the outside as like, I'm just going to bring that right in. And I'm going to make a new edge, just like this. And then what I'm going to do here is similarly, actually, before I do that, what I need to do is I need to fix this. So what I want to do is soften this up a little bit because what happened with like the painting sort of made this weird edge because of the selection. So I'm going to soften that by creating a mask. There we go. So that brings back sort of a softer edge there. And what I want to do is now I want to actually go back and paint. Actually, no, sorry. I'm going to redo this. So sometimes the approach that you want is not exactly, you have to try different approaches sometimes. That's what I'm trying to say. So I'm selecting this area because I don't want to get any paint on this box. Because what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a soft brush and I'm going to paint in a new soft edge here. If you can hear my dog barking in the background, apologies. He's a little challenged right now. So sometimes doing that by hand can be a little tricky, but okay. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my clone and I am going to shorten up this shadow probably about right there, create a new line, and then I'm going to bring this one up probably right about there, create a new line all the way over, and then I'm going to bring this one up. Actually, let's finish with this line here. Nope, let me redo that, guys. So I'm going to bring this one up here, right about here. Do that, and then I'm going to bring this line over. Actually, I want to use this. See if I can get that. So what's going to happen is if I carry this up, it's going to go on the box. So what I want to do is I want to create a selection to prevent that from happening. So it's telling me like I only want to work in this area. So now I can go back to my clone tool and I can do that again. So let's see, I'm going to bring this over like that. Actually, again, guys, it does take some trial and error, so let's do this again. I'm going to select this first. Now I'm going to actually extend my selection a little bit further so I can get that edge that I want to clone. So now I'm going to get my clone tool, I'm going to bring that here, bring that over. Now I want to grab that piece. There we go. It's much better. Okay, so now what I can do is deselect that and then grab my selection tool now. Actually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use hand selection. So I'm going to do this. And now I'm going to paint. Take a big brush. Alright, so now we have to kind of go in and clean up a little bit. So I'm going to make a soft brush, but I'm going to make it smaller. And there's a little bit of like dark over here, so because it's so close to the box, again, I'm going to make a selection so that the paint doesn't go on to the box. There we go. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. I would probably spend a little bit more time like cleaning that up a little bit, but you guys get the idea. The next thing I want to do is really go in to see if the paint like overstepped anywhere that I need to be aware of. Like here we've got some weirdness going on. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this mask and I'm just going to sort of mask out those areas where I see our issues. So I'm going to use the black brush. I think that's fine. Looks like we've got some blue that bled over here. Okay, so that looks good. The next thing I want to show you guys is how you can like realign some of these items if they're like super crooked. So because I'm kind of done with this, I'm gonna go ahead and flatten the image, and I'm gonna create a new layer. So one thing I noticed, like this guy here is a little crooked. So all I'm gonna do is get my marquee tool and make a selection right around it. And then I'm gonna go to edit, free transform, or Command T if you want the shortcut, and just move that. So when you do that though, you need to make sure that you're not creating any outlines. Sometimes that happens with doing this. It just depends. This one I'm gonna straighten out a little bit. And then, let's see. I missed a little bit of blue up here. You see guys, see that? I'll show you one way you can work around that. So all I'm using is the keyboard shortcut, Command T, for these. And this one might need a little bit. It's kind of wonky because the packaging was a little strange, but okay. So we've got some, because we've already flattened our image, we don't have an original image to work from again. So that's sometimes what stinks about flattening your image. But working with a lot of layers can be tough too. So I'm just going to correct that by using our clone tool. And I'm going to make it a little bit smaller, and I'll bring some hardness up. Actually, bring smaller. And the other thing you could do is actually paint on by using the paintbrush and then changing your mode to color. You can actually paint on without actually introducing more color. Sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. I'm not loving it because of the way it's making the highlights look. So I'm going to go ahead and continue to work with my clone tool. Another thing you could do actually is you could copy this. So if I wanted to like copy this and paste it up there, we could see how that would look. So I'm going to try that. So I'm going to go to edit, copy, and then edit, paste. And it's in this layer here, but you can't really see it. So I'm going to go ahead and go to edit, free transform. And I'm just going to move it right there, and I'm going to adjust it a little bit. So it's not perfect, but if I were to really try and work with this, I would probably try and mask out the edges. Something like that. So there you go. So that's that. All right, guys. So I would probably just really go in and clean up the image, but ultimately that's how you can go from, I'll show you, let's flatten the image, then we're going to save it. This I have a preference changing it. It's supposed to be tots, but anyways, that's besides the point. So So we went from this to that by using some advanced Photoshop techniques. So if you have questions, let me know. Hopefully this was good for you. Happy to show you more.